Shabbat Shalom. I'm Cantor David Proser from Kempsville Conservative Synagogue, Kehillat Bet HaMidrash in Virginia Beach, Virginia. And this is our Torah portion for the Shabbat of Saturday, July 17th, 2021, corresponding to the 8th day of the month of Menachem Av in the year 5781 in the Hebrew calendar. We thank Rabbi Joseph Prauser, Rabbi Joyce Newmark, Rabbi Michael Gold, Rabbi Adam Rosenbaum, my friend and colleague Rabbi Michael Panitz, and the United Synagogue Torah Spark series for their various teachings and publications on this week's Parsha. This Shabbat we read the first Parsha in the 5th book of the Torah. The name Devarim, or Deuteronomy, refers both to this first Parsha as well as to the entire 5th book. Parshat Devarim begins on page 981 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 736 of the Hertz. Both its Greek name, Deuteronomy, meaning second telling, and its classical Hebrew designation, Mishnah Torah, a repetition of the Torah, aptly describe both the 5th book of the Torah and this opening Parsha. In a more direct interpretation of the Hebrew name Devarim, which translates to the word words, this book constitutes one powerful and sustained verbal presentation from Moshe to the Israelite people. The entire book consists of Moshe's farewell speech and final instructions to the people that he has led for 40 years. It contains an overview of the history of the wilderness years, a review and elaboration of the statutes and ordinances of the Torah, Moshe's final blessing, and his death. In his first oration, or discourse, to the Israelite nation, in this first Parsha in the book of Devarim, Moshe recaps much of the people's earlier experiences and the lessons that have come from their journey. This begins with God's command to the Israelites at Horeb to make their way to Canaan and to take possession of the land. Moshe recalls the burden of leadership and his resulting appointment of judges and chieftains to share in the day-to-day leadership of the nation. He further recalls the journey from Horeb through Amorite territory to Kadesh, where spies were dispatched into the promised land. The story differs slightly from the original in the book of Numbers. In this telling, the Israelites asked God for permission to send spies into the land. In the book of Numbers, God commands the Israelites to send spies into the land. In both versions, 10 spies return with a faithless and pessimistic majority report about the prospect of success in conquering the land. God punishes the entire generation, telling them that they will wander for 40 years until that current generation dies off. Only Joshua and Caleb, the two dissenting optimists among the spies, are duly rewarded. They alone of their generation are to be permitted entry into the land, where Caleb will receive an allotment and Joshua will assume national leadership. Moshe, too, is denied entry into Canaan. This divine decree requires the Israelites to follow a tenuous, circuitous route through the wilderness, involving confrontations with the nations of Edom, Ammon, and Moab. The crushing Amorite defeat of the Israelites at Hormah is recalled. Other encounters with hostile foreign powers include more recent ones, such as those with Sichon and Og. Sichon of Heshbon refuses Israel's permission to traverse his territory, despite Israel's friendly diplomatic request. Israel is compelled to battle both Sichon the Amorite and Og of Bashan, overcoming each and seizing their lands. After conquering these kings, the Israelites are encamped on the steppes of Moab, on the eastern shore of the Jordan. They are close enough to look out into the Holy Land. The beginning of the allotment of tribal portions in conjunction with the conquest is recapped. Reuven, Gad, and half the tribe of Manasseh are apportioned choice pasture lands in the conquered territory, as earlier explained, in the land east of Jordan. Their territorial grant is conditioned upon their participation in the national military defense as shock troops, the vanguard of the conquest. This generation is far more ready and willing to follow God's instructions, and thus is deemed ready to enter the promised land. Parshat Devarim concludes with Moshe retelling his appointment of Joshua as his successor, and his charge to his protege not to fear the kings, powers, and forces he encounters in bringing about the conquest. For it is the Lord your God who will battle for you. This portion is read every year on Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat before the fast of Tisha B'Av. This year, Tisha B'Av begins on Saturday night at the conclusion of Shabbat. The Haftorah for this Shabbat is from the book of Isaiah, chapter 1, verses 1 to 27, beginning on page 1000 of the Eitz Chaim Chumash and page 750 of the Hertz. Just as in the past 2 weeks, this Haftorah is not connected to today's Torah Parsha of Devarim by theme. Rather, it was chosen as the third of 3 prophetic readings of rebuke for the 3 weeks that precede Tisha B'Av. This Haftorah is always read on the Shabbat preceding Tisha B'Av, the fast of the 9th day of the Hebrew month of Av, the anniversary of the fall of Jerusalem, both at the hands of the Babylonians and 6 centuries later at the hands of the Romans. For this Shabbat, the opening chapter of Isaiah, which contains the great arraignment of Judah, has been selected as the Haftorah, in order to warn all generations in Israel of the moral and social transgressions that led to the downfall of the Jewish state. It is also from the first words of this Haftorah, Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Isaiah, that this Shabbat came to be known as Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision, the Shabbat before Tisha B'Av. Though chapter 1 is not the earliest of Isaiah's prophecies, its choice as the opening of the book is most appropriate. It strikes the fundamental notes of Isaiah's teachings, and at the same time indicates the general line of prophetic doctrine with a force and clearness unsurpassed in Scripture. Now, even though the Torah to Haftorah connection is mainly calendar-wise, there is one direct connection between them, the word Eicha, meaning how, or how could it be. In the Torah reading, Moshe says, Eicha esa levadi, how can I bear the burden alone? In the Haftorah, Isaiah says, Eicha ha'ati lezona, how has the city become as a harlot? And in the book of Eicha, the book of Lamentations, that we will read on the eve of Tisha B'Av, the prophet Jeremiah says, Eicha yashva bidad, how has she, meaning Jerusalem, sat alone? In each case, Eicha comes as an echo of disappointment, sadness, and lamentation. Eicha is both a question and an exclamation, expressing the contrast between what was previously and what each one is currently witnessing. Eicha calls upon us to look in the mirror and accept responsibility for our actions, and teaches us not just to lament our failings, but to learn, to grow, and to move on in order to find new meaning in our lives, even in our suffering. Thank you for watching. Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos. Be sure to subscribe, to like, to hit the notification bell so you always know when we post new content, and feel free to leave comments below. Shabbat Shalom, good Shabbos.